The UN's latest sanctions on North Korea are apparently having an effect in China. Chinese news outlet The Global Times reported Thursday that scores of trucks carrying seafood from North Korea are being turned back at customs in the northeastern Chinese city of Hunchun after Beijing introduced a ban on seafood, coal, and iron ore on Monday. An official from the city said he's not sure if North Korean companies will be able to compensate local firms for the losses they'll see by sending the seafood back. The newspaper also reported that another ban on bringing in new workers from the north would mean that North Korean restaurants in China will soon be short-staffed. The state-run restaurants are already reported to have seen a significant fall in customers this year. In the past, they've earned Pyongyang an estimated $10 million in hard cash a year.
From the Pentagon, the top leadership from the USS Fitzgerald warship has been fired. That vessel collided with a cargo ship 2 months ago near Japan, resulting in the deaths of 7 sailors. The Vice Chief of Naval Operations saying Fitzgerald Commanding Officer Bryce Benson has been what is called detached for cause. Also fired the ship's second in command and top enlisted sailor. An official announcement is expected tomorrow. From South Korea now, the leader of that country saying President Trump has promised to give him a heads up before beginning any type of military response to recent threats from the north. Japan might also have something to say about the matter. Correspondent Rich Edson has the latest tonight at the State Department.
Top diplomatic and defense officials from one of the United States' closest allies are in Washington, coordinating a response to a common threat.
North Korea's recent intercontinental ballistic missile and other missile launches are unacceptable provocations, and they must stop immediately.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson hosted at the State Department Defense Secretary James Mattis and their Japanese counterparts, less than a week after escalating threats from President Trump and North Korea consumed the region. And they met only hours after White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon said, according to the American Prospect, that there is no military solution in North Korea, adding, quote, "They got us."
I don't really have a comment on what Mr. Bannon's remarks were in that particular interview. I read those. I think we have been quite clear as to what the policy and the posture towards North Korea is.
In close collaboration with our allies, there are strong military consequences if DPRK initiates hostilities.
Traveling in China, Marine Corps General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the president told the military to develop a credible, viable military option, and, quote, "That's exactly what we're doing." He added a military solution would be horrific, though allowing North Korea to develop nuclear technology to hit the United States is unimaginable. In South Korea, President Moon Jae-in says the U.S. promises to consult with his government before attacking North Korea.
Only South Korea can decide military actions on the Korean Peninsula. Nobody can choose to carry out military action without South Korea's consent. The United States and President Trump have made a promise to fully cooperate and ask for our agreement in advance before utilizing whatever options they might use against the North.
North Korea says it is holding off on a decision to launch missiles towards Guam, home of Andersen Air Force Base, strategically placed and where the United States launches B-1 bombers in a show of force, or more, if necessary. The military has also installed a missile defense system on Guam, did so permanently back in 2015. It's the first time the U.S. had deployed that system outside the continental U.S. Bill.
And we are going to lose if we don't fight back. That is according to Steve Bannon in a freewheeling phone call to Robert Kuttner at the American Prospect. That happened Tuesday afternoon. Bannon said, quote, "We are at economic war with China. It's in all their literature. They're not shy about saying what they're doing. One of us is going to be a hegemon in 25 or 30 years, but it's going to be them if we go down this path." Well, the Chinese responded by saying, quote, "There is no winner in a trade war." So, should we really be looking at this as an economic battle to the death? Or perhaps could free trade cure some of our mutual ills? Joining me now, he's back in business, Brian Brenberg. He's an associate professor of economics at the King's College in New York City. Bryanomics is what we call it. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Great to have you. Let's discuss, because We all know that free trade is great, but you say that Bannon actually has it right when it comes to intellectual property theft.
Yeah, well, the problem with China is it's not totally free trade. There's some aspects of free trade, but look, China is one of the biggest IP abusers in the world, and they've been at it for a long time, and that's an attack on property rights. Free trade is great, but if property rights aren't defended, free trade doesn't work. It can't exist in the first place.
Property rights are a natural right and a cornerstone of a free society.
Yeah, it's physical property rights, but it's intellectual property rights. So, and that's the U.S.'s big comparative advantage. That's what we make. We make great ideas, and that's what we export. And if China's undermining that, then we can't trade with China. And our companies in China are at risk, and they've been at risk for a very long time. The U.S. government hasn't defended them. One of the legitimate roles of government is to defend property rights. They haven't done that with the Chinese. I'm actually heartened that the Trump administration is talking about doing that. It can't be for the purpose of protectionism. That's not what we're doing here. It's to protect property rights.
But it almost seems like that's the road that Bannon is going down when he talks about the necessity of a trade war. Now, is there a way of standing up for American intellectual property, but at the same time expanding trade so everyone makes money?
Yeah, it's going after process, not outcomes. You hear the Trump administration, you hear Bannon talking all the time about trade deficits and we import too much from China. That's not the issue. When the U.S. is wealthiest, actually, is when we import the most from China. That's not the problem. The problem is process. It's things like IP. It's things like forcing companies to give up their technology in order to do business in China.
And that's what the Chinese government does.
Yes, they do that. They do it blatantly. They prop up their state-owned enterprises, which makes it almost impossible for U.S. companies to gain a legitimate foothold in their country. Those things should change. If China wants to be recognized as a free trade partner, and they do, they have to change these things, and it's legitimate for the U.S. to put pressure on them to do that.
All right, and we will see if that happens. Steve Bannon has been a lightning rod of criticism this week. He said that conversation that he had with Robert Kuttner was supposed to be off the record. Clearly, it wasn't.
He's a friend of mine. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon.
Well, President Trump leaving the door open earlier this week as we learn new details about his decision to remove Chief Strategist Bannon from the White House. Here now, Vince Colanese. He is the Daily Caller editor-in-chief. So, Vince, for all the talk about Charlottesville, frankly, what I think had more to do with his getting fired than anything else was North Korea. His comments to the reporter, he says they were supposed to be off the record, but he said there's no military solution, forget it. Now, that directly conflicted with what both Tillerson and Jim Mattis said about North Korea, where they said the military option is on the table. What do you think about that?
I think so, and I think that you can add President Trump to that list for saying fire and fury would rain down on North Korea if they continue to threaten the United States. So Steve Bannon goes out and clearly shows the hand of the administration, suggests that North Korea has all the leverage here because Seoul, South Korea would be essentially evaporated if North Korea decided to start firing. That was enough to demonstrate, I think, a very clear difference between Steve Bannon and the White House in terms of just betraying a policy position, one that needs to be close-hold, especially in a national security situation.
When you differ with the commander-in-chief on thermonuclear war, I mean, forget about it. That is firing charges right there. But the way that the Democrats are spinning this, I know they would. You knew they were going to spin it in their favor, or try to anyway. Connecting it to Charlottesville, connecting it to their theme that anybody who supports the president right now is a racist, and starting with Steve Bannon, who is whispering little racist things in his ear. Nancy Pelosi, or the DNC, let out a charge. There is one less white supremacist in the White House. Donald Trump, recent attempts to divide our country and give a voice to white supremacists will not be accepted. I mean, do you think the public is going to buy the fact that either not just Bannon, but anybody who supports the president right now is a racist?
No, I don't. And I think this idea that they were going to tie Steve Bannon to somehow the Charlottesville response, any of that, it was just not going to work. And by the way, to the extent that Steve Bannon is now separated from the White House and the role that the president played in that, The president would not be compelled by those arguments. Those are nonsense. I mean, in fact, the one thing over the last week that made me think that Steve Bannon might stay in the White House is Nancy Pelosi demanding his firing, because the president is clearly not affected by the political winds here. He's not going to be responding to Democrats' demands. If anything, the extent to which there is any internal politics involved, it may be John Kelly's trying to sort of streamline the White House and bring it all into a very basic chain of command.
You know, just to show how absurd things have become, Maxine Waters, who said some pretty absurd things, is now claiming that even Dr. Ben Carson is a white supremacist. Now, they clearly think that Americans are so dumb that they would think an African-American like Ben Carson is a white supremacist. I mean, that's almost lunatic.
That'd be quite a magic trick if that Ben Carson is all of a sudden a white supremacist. Ben Carson, by the way, just announcing over the last few days that his home was vandalized for the fact that he's working in the Trump administration. Ben Carson earning very few friends by doing that. So I would say probably at the bottom of his list is any interest.